Lug was a goat assassin but got betrayed and died like an episode 1 NPC. However, when a goddess offers him new life in exchange for slaying a god, he chooses to reincarnate and form a team of assassin baddies for his mission, but they only want his loaded gun. Before his reincarnation, he was an assassin in another world, and was on a mission on the day he died. After taking out his targets, the hitman and his partner arrived at their hideout. After checking in with their organization, they took their fake passports and went to the airport. Unfortunately, the plan was hijacked while in the air, and the hitman deduced that it was the organization's doing, and his last mission was an excuse to get rid of him. He attempted to fly the plane to safety after finding both pilots dead, but there was nothing he could do against the fighter jet that was on their tail. In the end, the plane was shot down, and he accepted his fate. His final thoughts were of annoyance because he couldn't believe that the organization would betray him after he had spent all his life doing all their dirty work. After his death, he found himself in a strange place, and a woman who introduced herself as a goddess told him that she can reborn him in another world with all his memories intact. The only thing he had to do in return is to assassinate the hero that will destroy the world. She explained that the world he'd be reborn in was a fantasy one with swords and magic, and filled his mind with all the information regarding the world. She also allowed him to select his skills and attributes, so he could have a fighting chance against the hero when the time came. With his skill and attribute selection done, the goddess informed him that he would be born into the noble house of Tuatha, a family that made their living through assassination. Shortly after this, she sent him on his merry way, and he was born instantly to the happy Tuatha couple. After his birth, he was given the name Lug by his father, Sion, and his mother, Esri, asked her husband if he would raise him in the Tuatha way. Sion promised that he wouldn't let Lug die and assured her that he'd become a top-notch assassin, just like Killua. A few years down the line, Lug grew into an exceptional young man with skills not common to kids his age. However, he had yet to use magic, as he still needed a mentor to teach him before he could learn how to. One day, he went hunting and, after tracking down his prey, he brought it down with a single headshot that would make Hawkeye jealous. After securing his catch, Lug returned home and prepared a meal with it despite his mother wanting to do it for him. When the meal was ready, the family settled down to eat. Sion and Esri complimented Lug's cooking, saying it was as good as what a 5-star Michelin chef would make. After lunch, Lug went down to the training room, and when he got there, Lug instructed him to strip. This was so he could examine him and take note of how well his joints moved, and how his muscles and skeletal structure were developing. The examination was something that happened once a week, and each time, Sion used the results to determine Lug's next training course. After Sion's examination, he informed Lug that he would perform magical surgery, and give him the mystic eyes of the Tuatha family. The eyes were a secret passed down in the family, and they strengthened the user's eyesight, allowed them to perceive another person's mana, and also gave them a bunch of other advantages that those with normal eyes didn't have. A few days after the surgery, the preteen Gojo ripoff was in the garden with his mother when his father came to check on him. The man said it was time for his bandage to come off, and once he took it off, Lug discovered that he could see better than before. His new eyes were so good that he could see far away without using binoculars, as well as perceive mana while looking at a person. His father then informed him that he'd gotten him a tutor to teach him magic, which made Lug very excited. On the day he met his tutor, his mother dressed him up as a girl and refused to let him change out of it. His tutor, who, to his surprise, was not much older than he was named Daya Vicones, and she proved that she was worthy of her role by showing him a glimpse of her magical abilities. After her enormous firework display, Daya and Lug went to the garden to begin their training, which she informed him would only last for 2 weeks. The first thing Daya did was determine Lug's magical capabilities by giving him a far stone, which was used for storing mana, and asking him to pour as much of his mana into it as possible. Lug did as he was told, but when the mana began escaping the stone, Daya became surprised and worried. Surprised because she hadn't realized that she was in the presence of a protagonist with cheat-level abilities, and worried because the more mana he poured into the stone, the more dangerous it became. When the stone cracked, she screamed at Lug to toss it as far away as he could. So he did, and a few seconds later, it exploded. The shockwaves created by the explosion shattered all the windows of the mansion and almost destroyed the place. Sion and Aesir immediately rushed to the garden to check on the kids, and when they discovered their son was responsible for an explosion equaling that of a nuclear warhead, they praised him for being a protege. The following day, during training, Daya checked Lug's attributes and taught him how to convert his mana's attributes so he could cast spells. When they were finished, she asked him to infuse a far stone with mana. Lug did as he was told, and the next moment, Lug began seeing letters in his mind. When he told Daya this, she explained that those letters were a spell. According to her, in their world, if a person took mana from their attribute, They received a spell as a revelation from God. She said the more often he cast them, the more new spells he'd receive from God, and to cast them all he had to do was speak the incantation in his mind. Lug tried but soon discovered that he couldn't read the letters, so he told Daya, and she demonstrated how to cast a spell. The spell she cast was to create copper, and after seeing her do it, Lug repeated the words to create his copper. Unfortunately, his pronunciation was off, so he ended up with a poorly formed copper stone instead of the type Daya had. Realizing his problem, Lug asked Daya to teach him how to pronounce the words properly, and she happily agreed. A few days later, Lug showed Daya that her teachings were paying off by presenting her with a properly formed copper stone. Daya was proud of his achievement, but Lug felt he could do more and suggested that she transcribe a spell for him to try casting. Intrigued, she agreed to do it, and when she was done, Lug cast it, leaving her in awe and making her wonder why no one had ever thought to transcribe a spell before. As he read through the spells Daya transcribed, he noticed they were similar and suddenly got hit with a great idea. He asked her to transcribe all the spells she knew and explained that if they were all similar, all they had to do was change some parts and create new spells. When she finished, Lug took the spells and studied them, after which he instructed Daya on how to write a spell to create gold before asking her to cast it. Surprisingly, when she tried, she suddenly felt dizzy and fell to the ground, causing them to think they had made a mistake with the spell. However, when Lug tried the spell, it worked perfectly, and that was when he realized that those without that skill couldn't use spells they had written themselves. So he rewrote the spell and asked her to try casting it again. Daya was skeptical about doing it, but Lug convinced her to act as a guinea pig one more time for the sake of their research, and she did. Thankfully, it worked, and she created gold, causing her to be very excited and say that she would have Lug transcribe all the new spells she came up with going forward. Another day, the two went somewhere else to try out their new spells so that no one would know what they were up to. The spell they came up with created a rifle that used fire magic to discharge bullets, and they named it Fire. While Daya was excited over having a new magical item, Lug felt he still needed more firepower if he wanted to take down the hero, so he modified the spell. This modification created a cannon which caused a large explosion when he fired it at a rock sitting in the middle of the water. The night before Daya was to leave, Lug created a knife and gave it to her, saying it was his token of gratitude to her for teaching him magic and saving him from having to deal with the insufferable Professor Snape at Hogwarts. In return for him teaching her how to create new spells, Daya gave Lug the Far Stone she wore as a necklace and made him promise to come to see her whenever she wanted him to. The following day, after Daya left, Cyan took Lug to a prison for death row criminals and explained that the prisoners would become his learning tools. His first test subject was a girl accused of theft, murder, and arson, and Cyan told Lug to execute her in whatever way he thought was best. The girl cried and pleaded with Lug to spare her life, but all her pleas fell on deaf ears as the boy used his blade to slice her hand off. He explained that the blood loss would ensure that she felt no pain as she died, and the girl got pissed. Immediately, she went from remorseful to vengeful and began insulting him, but it didn't change the fact that she would still die. 3 years later, Lug and his parents went to the marketplace to see how the people were faring. His father commented on how good the harvest that year was, but his overly dramatic mother was busy complaining about how Lug didn't need her anymore because he turned her down when she suggested they share a cookie. Ignoring his parents, Lug used his his mystic eyes to search for someone who had mana. The person he found was too old to serve the purpose, so he looked around to see if there was someone else. Unfortunately, in the entire town, no one else possessed mana, as it was mostly nobles and their branch families who had mana. This put him in a tough spot because he wanted to recruit someone who would assist him with his assassinations. However, he decided he would be patient. Some days later, he went hunting, and while looking for prey, he sensed a pack of wolves nearby. Putting his ear to the ground, he listened carefully and deduced that they were closing in on a prey. Deciding to steal the prey for himself, Lug headed in the direction of the wolves, and when he arrived, he was surprised to see that the prey was a young girl. Immediately, he shot the wolf and jumped down to hand his things to her, so he could fight freely. Using magic, he created protective gauntlets for his arms and went to town on the hungry mutts. The wolves tried to overpower Lug, but he calmly took them out like they weren't deadly animals. After the last wolf fell dead at his feet, Lug turned to face the malnourished Goldilocks and asked why she was deep in the forest. The girl weakly explained that she'd been tossed out by her family and left to die because there were too many mouths to feed at home. She said a good Samaritan had told her that the region of Tuatha Dé was wealthy, so she had come there in hopes that she'd meet someone to take her in. After listening to what would have been the beginning of the girl's villain arc story, Lug set up camp and prepared some porridge. When it was cooked, he put some in a bowl and told the girl that if she ate too fast, he wouldn't give her seconds. The girl thanked him for the food, and while she ate, he went to drain the blood from the wolves he'd hung up. When he got back, the girl had finished the food, so he gave her another bowl and took a good look at her. Her appearance confirmed that the things he'd heard about the lord of her region being a greedy old fool who imposed extremely high taxes on his already poor citizens were true. Hoping to make the girl feel comfortable, he revealed that he was the son of the lord of the Tuatha region, and that made the girl happy. She told him that God had told her in a dream that she would have a fatal encounter, and she was sure that meeting Lug was the encounter. Hearing this made Lug assume the goddess had sent the girl his way, so he asked if she wanted to come live with him. He promised that if she did, she wouldn't have to worry about anything again, as he would take care of all her needs. The girl was skeptical about this, but Lug managed to convince her to agree by telling her that he needed her. As someone who had never been needed or wanted before, the girl happily said yes to his proposal. The situation quickly turned into an Aaron and Mikasa situation. But unlike Aaron, Lug wasn't offering the blonde girl a place because he was nice, and he proved it with his next actions. He asked the girl if she thought he was a good person, and she said yes. But he assured her that he wasn't by revealing that he'd unalived people. The girl was shocked by his revelation, but he didn't give her a chance to recover from it because he told her that he was going to keep doing it. However, after thinking for a while, the girl told him that despite the things he'd done and the things he'd still do, she didn't think he was a bad person. Lug thanked her for believing in him, but said if she was coming to live with him, she would have to assist him in carrying out his dirty work. He said if she couldn't do that, then the offer was off the table. But the girl told him that she didn't mind getting her hands dirty because it meant he needed her. Lug then stretched out his hand for her to take, and after he told her his name, the girl introduced herself to him as Tart. He was very pleased with himself for managing to recruit the girl because, from the moment he saw her, he knew she had mana. Everything he'd done from that point on was a carefully thought out plan to manipulate her into becoming a tool for him to use in carrying out the mission given to him by the goddess. And it worked like a charm. 2 years after Lug saved Tart and brought her home, the girl had not only grown to become a beautiful watermelon ambassador, but also an excellent servant worthy of becoming the next Alfred Pennyworth. Lug's parents sang Tart's praises as they couldn't have asked for a better servant for their son. After breakfast that morning, Tart went to the training room to see Lug, and he instructed her to strip so he could examine her the same way his father examined him. The thing was that before allowing Tart to be trained as an assassin, Cyan had told Lug that he was solely responsible for her, and he added that if she ever betrayed them, Lug would have to get rid of her himself. Lug had accepted his father's conditions and trained Tart to become an exceptional assassin. The only problems he still faced with her were her inability to use a knife properly in combat and her inability to catch him off guard with her sneak attacks. Nevertheless, he was sure that with more training, she could become better because he knew how dedicated she was. Unfortunately, her dedication wasn't enough to improve her knife skills, so Lug crafted a special foldable spear for her since she was very good with spears. The day after he gifted her the spear, Lug awoke to find Tart on his bed and asked why she was there. She explained that she came to bring him some herbal tea and found him asleep, so she lay down beside him to watch him sleep like a creep and fell asleep herself. After her explanation, she thanked Lug for giving her the spear and promised that with it, she would become someone he could rely on. Lug didn't respond to this, but in his mind, he told himself that everything was going according to his plan. A few days later, Lug and Tart visited the marketplace, and while there, the villagers gifted Lug many things to thank him for all the help he had often rendered to them. Later that night, while Lug was in his room, he put away the far stones he'd filled with mana. It turned out that he'd analyzed the one Daya gifted him and learned how to produce the stones, and ever since then, he'd been filling them up with mana and storing them away for when he had to face the hero. Just as he finished putting the stones away, Tart knocked on his door, and when she came in, she informed him that his father was asking for him. Lug went down to the training room to see Cyan immediately after that, and when he arrived, Cyan asked for a progress report. Lug informed his father that he was 100% sure that Tart wasn't a spy. It turned out that even though Cyan had allowed Lug to take Tart in and train her, he'd been distrustful of her since he believed she was a spy sent to them to steal their techniques. Lug explained that since he met Tart, he'd observed her behaviors and speech patterns to see if they would show signs that she was lying, but he hadn't found any. After this confirmation, Cyan told Lug that the reason he'd summoned him was because he wanted to give him the details of his next training course. The training course involved 2 parts, a test and a training exercise. Cyan explained that if Lug passed the test and completed the training exercise, he would recognize him as a full member of the Tuatha family and start assigning assassination jobs to him. Feeling confident in his abilities, Lug accepted to do the course, and Cyan informed him that the test was to fight him. He said it didn't matter if Lug won or not, as all he wanted to see was how capable he was in combat. On the night of the test, Lug and Cyan went into the forest to battle it out, and Lug used everything he knew to his advantage. When he first spotted Cyan, the man shot arrows at him, but Lug defended himself using his knives. He then charged at his old man and barely managed to avoid getting cut, but when he attempted to retaliate, Cyan broke his ankle by slamming his elbow on it. Using his uninjured leg, Lug kicked Cyan and escaped before using magic to heal himself. By the time he was finished, Cyan had disappeared into the darkness again. So Lug thought of a plan to help himself. The bushes beside him shook, causing him to move, but he soon realized that Cyan had set a trap for him. He managed to dodge the trap, but discovered it was a decoy to distract him from Cyan's real position because the man showed up a second later and tried to cut him. Thankfully, his reflexes kicked in and he dodged the attack, but that left him open and Cyan began attacking him relentlessly. Lug switched to defense mode and kept defending himself until he found an opening to hit Cyan. When this happened, Cyan retreated into the shadows, allowing Lug to catch his breath and think. He realized Cyan had been predicting his movements and decided it was time to start doing the same. He tried to sense Cyan's presence, but the man was more skilled than a ninja and masked his presence properly. The only thing Cyan managed to sense were the two blades coming towards him from opposite directions. By the time Lug deflected both blades, his mind wasn't that settled. So when Cyan pounced on him from above, he couldn't defend in time and got stabbed in the shoulder. However, he'd managed to place his knife underneath Cyan's throat, meaning he was the winner of the match. Cyan gladly accepted his defeat, and as the sun began to climb, he helped Lug dress his wounds. While doing that, he admitted he hadn't expected to lose to Lug, and Lug said Cyan could have easily won since he hadn't used magic. Cyan didn't think so and even criticized Lug's refusal to use magic, but Lug told him that using magic would have rendered the fight meaningless. Cyan then praised him for realizing what the test was truly about and proudly said the only thing left for Lug to do was gain experience. From that day forward, Cyan took Lug on every mission he had and taught him everything there was to know about being in the field. One evening on their way home from visiting a patient, Cyan informed Lug that the final part of his training involved him posing as a merchant. He explained that he'd arranged for a fake person to be born around the same time as Lug was born to the head of the Balor Trading Company. The fake child was named Ilig Balor, and the head of the Balor family had agreed to include him in his family register because he owed Cyan a favor. Cyan then told Lug that his mission was to live as Ilig Balor for the next 2 years, learn how to be a merchant, and build a network of his own using that position. A few days later, a party was thrown to celebrate Lug's departure, and those in attendance were the members of the branch families. Cyan sang Lug's praises, and all but one stupid idiot agreed that Lug was ready to embark on the final test. The idiot in question was named Rana, and he said he'd never accept Lug as the next head of the Tuatha Dé family. This was because after Ruff, Cyan's first son, died, Rana became the next in line for the position. However, he was pushed back after Lug was born, and he hated that. To settle the issue, Cyan declared that both boys would fight and said that whoever won would be the next head of the family. Immediately after the words left Qian's mouth, Rana found himself at Lug's mercy, as the latter had snuck up on him and was holding a knife to his neck. Rana argued that Lug had cheated, so Cyan ordered Lug to put the blade away and fight with his fists. This still didn't give Rana an advantage because Lug had him on the floor in a matter of seconds, and everyone cheered for him. Later, Lug visited Rana to see how he was doing, and the boy admitted he was feeling irritated that he'd lost to someone younger than him. Lug told him not to feel bad because if anyone was supposed to feel anger for losing to him, it ought to be his father. Rana was surprised by this, as he'd refused to believe the great Cyan had lost to a kid when the news first broke. Lug assured him that it wasn't a lie and promised Rana that he would treat him fairly when he took over the family business if he agreed to become one of his lackeys. His reason was that Rana was a good knight, and he needed people as skilled as him around. Not seeing anything wrong with it, Rana agreed to become Lug's subordinate, and in return, Lug gifted him a sword made from the same material as the knife he'd given Daya years ago. The following day, Lug and Tart left the Tuatha Dé region for the city of Miltew, where he was to begin his new life as Ilig Balor. 2 years before Lug and Tart moved to Miltew, there was a group of street kids who made a living by giving tours to tourists. The mastermind behind their entire operation was a girl named Maha, who was always the first to approach potential customers. One afternoon, a sudden downpour halted their tours for the day, so the girls stayed under their makeshift home and counted their profits. While they were doing this and discussing, some men suddenly showed up and tried to catch them. Using her magic, Maha knocked one of the guys down, giving her friends an opening to escape their pursuers. Unfortunately, even though the girls ran as fast as they could, the men still caught Maha and 2 others. They then loaded them into a wagon and drove to a place on the outskirts of the city. The owner, Mr. Torin, informed the girls that the place was their new home and said as long as they did what they were told, they wouldn't have any problems. Noin protested, saying they didn't want to live in an orphanage. But Lloyd, the man who had brought them there, punched her in the face. The poorly drawn human Shrek then told the girls that if they dared to defy him again, they would face harsher consequences than a little punch. After this, the girls were taken to a small house where their remaining friends had been kept, and they were all relieved that no one was harmed. Aoife, the oldest among the girls, explained to Maha and the others that the men had brought them there because of money. It turned out that the wife of the region's lord usually gave money to people who took in kids without families, and Torin decided he wanted to enjoy that money. The girls were still discussing this so-called foster care situation they had been put in when Lloyd returned with a sack of food. He tossed the sack on the floor and told the girls it contained a week's worth of food. After he left, the girls got up and made something out of the measly rations provided for them. As they sat around the table, staring at their food, they expressed their sadness at the situation they were in. However, they tried to look on the bright side of things and encouraged themselves with the fact that they were all together. In the days that followed, they were treated worse than Cinderella and got hit for the littlest things while trying to carry out the chores assigned to them. Torin scolded Lloyd for hitting them, not because he cared, but because he considered them to be merchandise he didn't want to get damaged. That afternoon, he came with a viscount, who walked around the workshop and after looking at each girl, paid Torin some money and told him whom to bring to his lodgings that night. That night, while the girls were making dinner, Lloyd came for Aoife and Maha. When both girls got outside, he instructed Aoife to strip and then poured a bucket of water on her, after which he ordered Maha to scrub her clean and dress her up in one of the nice dresses they had made earlier. Once Aoife was all dressed and made up, she left with Lloyd, but returned a few hours later, looking sad and distraught. She ran off to the barn to cry, and when Maha found her, she begged her to stay away. So Maha stood there and let her cry her heart out. Unfortunately, that was the last time Aoife showed any kind of emotion, because the more she was pimped out, the more the light died in her eyes. Soon, she was entertaining that dirty old pig Torin, and when the others complained to Lloyd about the way Aoife was being treated, he told them to shut up. It wasn't long after that the remaining girls, except for Maha, began working as escorts for the numerous men Torin did business with. One night, after Noin returned from where she'd been sent, she hid away in the barn, crying the same way Aoife did when she was first given out. Eventually, she got tired of crying and decided that she was done being a cash cow for Torin. So before Maha could react, she began hacking away at her face with a sickle. Maha managed to take the tool away from her, but the damage had already been done, and Noin tearfully declared that no one would want her now that she looked like a Frankenstein monster. 2 years after the incident, Maha was on her way to serve tea to Torin when she overheard him and Lloyd talking about her. It turned out that they were ready to start selling her out like they did with the other girls. And the worst part was Torin expressing his unholy desire to tame her and make her his. Terrified, Maha ran to the barn as the images of her friends' sad and broken faces flashed in her mind. When she got there, she picked up a sickle, wondering if doing the same thing Noin had done would prevent the horrors that were about to befall her. However, she never got to find out. This was because Lug, dressed as his fake persona Illig, suddenly showed up behind her and told her that tears didn't suit her. Later, Torin gathered all the girls in the workshop and introduced them to Lug, explaining that Lug wanted to take one of them in. Lug then approached Maha, and after asking what she was, he told her that she was the one he wanted to join his family. At first, Torin tried to talk Lug out of taking Maha, but Lug offered more than what the Mr. Krabs imitation intended to sell her for, so he agreed to the deal. The only condition he set was that Lug return for Maha in 3 days, claiming that she needed to prepare for her departure properly. Immediately, Maha deduced what the sleazy son of a gun was plotting and tried to beg Lug to take her away at that moment, but Torin shut her up with a glare. Of course, Lug noticed this and told Torin that no harm must come to Maha because she was now part of his family, and Torin gave him his word. That night, Maha was washed and dressed for her first night out. As the carriage drove towards the lodging of the useless pig who paid for her, Torin told her that once she returned, he would play with her until Lug came to fetch her. Appalled by the way he was touching her, and not wanting to be defiled, Maha jumped out of the carriage and tried to run. Unfortunately, Lloyd was also a mana user, so he caught up with her before she could get far. Maha pleaded with him to let her go, and he told her that he'd only do that if she let him get a taste of her untapped nectar. He was in the process of running his filthy hands up and down her body when Lug showed up and beat him up. Torin arrived shortly after this, and he told Lug that he couldn't take Maha with him, but Lug said he could because Torin had broken his promise not to hurt her. Lloyd got back up just then, so Torin ordered him to attack both Lug and Maha, saying they would sell Lug off to a neighboring kingdom. Lloyd carried out Torin's orders and got beaten up badly by Lug, who held Torin at knife point after he was done with Lloyd. Meanwhile, Tart posed as Maha and went to visit the noble who paid for her. While the man was in the process of ripping her clothes off, some guards stormed him and announced that he was under arrest for trafficking. Much to his horror, when the sun rose the following day, the girls showed Noin that her once disfigured face had been healed, and Maha finally got to go home with Lug. Weeks later, Balor presented Lug with Maha's Maha's adoption papers, which showed that she was now a member of the Balor family. Another day, Balor visited Lug with the floor plan of a store belonging to his trading company and explained that he wanted Lug to take over the store. It was once used as a liquor store, but the store did badly and failed like my last relationship, so he was hoping Lug would find a better use for it. Lug agreed to take on the project, promising to think of an idea which wouldn't crash and burn like all of Plankton's ideas to steal the Krabby Patty formula. Later that evening, after Lug got home, he had dinner with Tart and Maha, and while they were still at the table, he told them about Balor's visit. He said he already had an idea of what he wanted the store to be and explained it to the girls, who agreed it was good. His plan was simple: create a product that would draw the attention of the public, mostly the noble female population, since they liked to gossip, and then build an information network which would serve his assassination purposes. He said he wanted to sell cosmetics and sweets, but Maha pointed out that those items were common in Miltew and would be difficult to enter the market with. Lug just smiled and assured her that he had the right product, which would push their store to the top of the cosmetic food chain. Sometime later, Lug invited Mr. and Mrs. Balor to a meeting to discuss the new product he intended to sell at the store. Balor was excited to see the product, but his wife was a bit grouchy and mean towards Lug because she truly believed he was her husband's illegitimate son and hated him for it. Lug ignored her snarky comments and went straight to the presentation part of the meeting to showcase his new product, which happened to be a moisturizer. Since moisturizers and lotions didn't exist in that world yet, Lug was sure it would be a hit on the market. He explained how the moisturizer worked and had Balor's wife use it to prove that it was what he claimed it was. She was skeptical, but after trying it and seeing that it was just as Lug claimed it would be, she stopped being outright rude to him. However, she made it clear that she still hated him more than people hated Gabby for what she did to Sasha. Balor then asked if she could spread the word about the moisturizer to her friends, and the woman assured them that she would do so. She even went as far as saying she would publicly declare Lug as her son if it meant she got more of the moisturizer. Hearing this, Balor told Lug that he would focus the company's resources on mass producing the moisturizers and asked him to hire more hands. Lug proposed that he slow down, explaining that if they hired more workers than necessary, the entire production process would be in jeopardy, as they could sell the formula to their competitors. Seeing the wisdom behind Lug's words, Balor asked how long it would take to properly set up mass production, and Lug answered that it would take about a month. The only problem they would encounter was with the secret Tuatha Dé medicine needed for the moisturizer's production. He then presented Balor with the estimated expenditures, and when the man began voicing his doubts about it, Lug convinced him that they were on the right track. In the end, Balor signed off on the production costs, and Lug left with Tart to begin preparations. On the way, they discussed how this deal would boost the economy of the Tuatha Dé region, and Lug revealed that he wouldn't teach the Balor company how to make the secret ingredient so that they would still regard him as a valuable asset. Exactly 6 months later, Lug's cosmetic store, Orna, was the most visited in the city, with women trooping in and out of the place to buy the moisturizers. Maha and her friends were the ones in charge of the store, and they ran it like a well-oiled machine. Lug and Tart sat at a nearby cafe watching the store, and Lug admitted that he hadn't expected the store to grow that much in such a short time. Tart said that the store's success was known even outside the kingdom, and they were receiving orders from princesses and noblewomen from other kingdoms. This made Lug feel proud of himself, and he not so subtly bragged about how he was now a famous man. Tart then told Lug that he was a kind man for hiring the Maha's friends to work at the store, but he said he had nothing to do with it. It was Maha's idea to hire the girls, but Tart still believed that if he wasn't kind-hearted, he would have rejected the idea like your crush rejected you. The conversation then shifted to their competitors, who had been sending their spies to the Balor factories to learn how to make the secret ingredients. From the reports, they bribed the employees to share what they knew, but they still couldn't get the information they were seeking. That night, as Lug lay in bed, he sensed someone sneaking onto his property, but didn't try to intercept the person. He allowed Tart and Maha to handle the situation, and after the girls caught the intruder, they took him down to the basement. When Lug went to check on them later, he saw that the girls had stripped the man and tied him to a chair. He praised them for putting the things he'd taught them into practice and stood back to observe as they tortured and questioned the man. Days later, Lug left Maha and Tart alone in the house because he was taking a trip to visit Daya. As he'd done every year since they met, Daya was happy to see him when he arrived, and they went on to spend the rest of the day going over the spells she wrote, eating chocolate, drinking tea, and catching up. When it was time for him to leave, they said their goodbyes, and he promised to see her the following month. When he arrived back home, Tart and Maha came to his room to spend the night. When they woke up in the morning, Lug discovered that his little soldier was up way before he opened his eyes. When the girls realized what was happening, they tried to convince him to let them give him a wristy and a sloppy toppy, but Lug refused, as he didn't want their relationship to change. A few nights later, two of Maha's friends were on their way home when two men jumped them and tried to take their money. Fortunately, Maha arrived just in time like the Powerpuff Girls and saved them. Sometime after that incident, Tart returned from the battlefield where Lug had sent her to gain more combat experience. The girl presented Lug with the buttons she had taken from the bodies of her enemies, and Lug pointed out that the behavior was one exhibited by psychopaths. He also told her that he'd heard stories of her achievements on the battlefield and said everyone was calling her the Lightning Quick Battle Maiden. Tart didn't like this name and pleaded with Lug to refer to her like that, so he kept quiet and took a sip of his drink as he observed Orna from his table. The business was still thriving, and he was having Maha use it as an avenue to gather information and handle money. Lug had also been busy because his newfound popularity had gained him invites to exclusive parties hosted by the nobles in the region. Going to these parties provided him with connections and information that could last 2 lifetimes. Later that day, Lug had a meeting with Maha, and she informed him that everything had been put in place for her to run the store while he was away. It so happened that the 2 years Cyan had given was drawing to a close, and he wanted Maha to continue managing the store while he returned to his normal life. She promised to make the brand bigger and also shared her plans to expand it to other locations. One of the locations she found was a shop space owned by a once thriving trading company, which was selling off its assets. Lug recognized the location because, during his background on Maha, he discovered that the shop was the first store her father opened. Maha's father was a merchant who owned a famous trading company, but he and his wife were murdered by his right-hand man, who took over the company. Instead of trying to become Batman, Maha had fled her hometown after the death of her parents because she'd been afraid of meeting the same fate. Looking at the plans before him, Lug deduced that Maha was trying to recover what belonged to his family. This prompted him to tell Maha that he didn't care if she dragged her issues into their business as long as she achieved positive results. Maha felt grateful that he didn't try to stop or discourage her and promised not to let him down. Just then, a knock sounded at the door, so Maha asked the girls to come in since they were the ones there. Once they were in the room, they gifted Lug some herbal tea they had bought to say goodbye to him. They thanked him for the things he did for them and expressed their sadness to see him leave. However, he promised not to forget them and asked that they look after the store while he was away. A few days later, Maha helped Lug prepare for his departure from Miltu to Tuatha Dé and was surprised when he returned his hair to its original color. When Tart came into the room wearing her signature outfit, Maha complimented her looks. Later, the three went outside, but before Lug and Tart got into their carriage, they stopped to speak with Maha. Lug reminded her that she was in charge of Orna and everything else that Ilig Balor was leaving behind, and promised to keep his business afloat. Tart apologized for leaving her alone in Miltu since the two had bonded over the period they had been together. Maha assured her that she wasn't mad and said that she was glad Lug had Tart with him, even though she was jealous that she couldn't tag along with them. She then gave Lug the miniature doll she made for him to remember her by and admitted that since they first met, she'd doubted him. This was because of the advice her father had given her about doubting people before learning to trust them. Maha told him she knew the only reason he wanted her was because she had mana, and he wanted to use her to carry out his missions. However, despite this selfish reason, she was happy that he found her useful and chose to keep her at his side. Later, during the ride to the Tuatha Dé region, the carriage encountered some wolf monsters. Tart instructed the driver to take cover inside the carriage while she asked Lug to allow her to deal with the monsters alone. After receiving Lug's go-ahead, Tart took out her spear and easily cut down the monsters without breaking a sweat. Lug was impressed by how she moved, as it showed how much she'd improved over the past 2 years. After praising Tart for a job well done, Lug looked around the place and told himself that it wouldn't be long until the hero showed up since monsters were starting to move into human territory. Sometime later, their carriage arrived at Tuatha Dé. But before heading home, Lug and Tart stopped to speak to the locals. The people were happy to have their young master back home, and to thank him for the business with the Balors they gave him some food items. When the carriage finally arrived at the Tuatha Dé mansion, Esri hugged Lug as if her life depended on it. She told him how much she missed him and said he wasn't allowed to leave again. But Lug pointed out that she was being absurd. When she was done smothering him, she turned her attention to Tart and thanked her for sticking with her grumpy son. Lug asked for his father, and his mother told him that he was in his study, so Lug left to speak to him. When he entered the study, Cyan looked up from the work he was doing and acknowledged his presence, after which he congratulated him for completing his final training. He said Lug had become an adult in the true sense of the word, and he was proud of him. Getting down to business, he told Lug that he'd sent him to train as a merchant, not just to gain information and connections which would help him as an assassin, but to let him experience a life different from the Tuatha Dé way. He shared his belief that Lug could be successful as both an assassin and a merchant, and revealed that Balor had come to speak with him concerning the issue. Balor believed Lug would make a fine merchant, and had recommended that he quit being an assassin and focus on being a merchant. Sion said he wouldn't stop Lug if he decided that Balor was right, and he didn't want to live his life as an assassin. Lug asked Sion to slow his roll and explained that even though he enjoyed his time as a merchant, nothing would change the fact that he was born to be a true Tuatha Dé. Sion asked if he was certain about his decision, and Lug swore that he was. He said that living as a Lig Balor was nice and dreamy, but choosing that life meant that he couldn't get married to Daya, who was the love of his life, since she was a noble and Illig wasn't one. Sion laughed after hearing this, but commended Lug for having good taste and said he was free to live the Tuatha Dé way. With that cleared up, Sion assigned Lug's first job to him and gave him the necessary details. His target was a noble who thought he was the next Pablo Escobar because he sold military secrets to neighboring kingdoms in exchange for drugs. Sion told Lug that he was free to handle the job as he saw fit, promising not to interfere. After leaving his father's study, Lug returned to his room and briefed Tart on their mission. The target was Count Asbavencor, and Lug said he would first do some investigation on his own to see if the man truly deserved to get iced. He wrote down a coded message, making arrangements to infiltrate the Count's home, and had carrier pigeons deliver it to Maha. The following day, Esri showed Lug the pictures of 3 girls and asked him to select the one who caught his fancy. When he asked why, she said the girl he selected would be his future bride. So Lug told her he wasn't interested in an arranged marriage. His mother didn't like this and began complaining about how she was getting old and wanted to see her grandbabies already. Tart held her tongue while she was saying all these absurd things, but Lug noticed how much she was struggling and fighting herself not to say anything inappropriate, so he gave her permission to speak. Grateful for the opportunity, Tart told Esri in the most polite way possible that she was worse than the meddling mamas on Bridgerton. She also told her that Lug was far too young to be considering marriage, but Esri argued that as long as he could get it up, he was old enough to be married. Suddenly, an idea popped into her head, and she suggested that Tart become Lug's baby mama since she had mana and came with baggage free. Unlike most nobles, caught off guard by the woman's words, Tart began feeling embarrassed. However, she didn't reject the idea. Thankfully, Lug spoke up and told his mother to stop saying nonsense. But the woman argued that she wasn't. She said Lug was being unreasonable and mean to her, and then tried to gaslight him into considering her idea by acting all dramatic and crying. Of course, her actions did not affect the stone-cold boy, and he told himself that he had to step up his game if he wanted to get his mother in check. When night came, Lug and Tart dressed up and left home to do some reconnaissance on the Count and the region he governed, since Lug wanted to know every single detail about the man. Lug and Tart arrived at the Count's region in the morning thanks to their super speed. As they walked around, they noticed many wounded soldiers, and according to Lug, those men were that way because they had been forced into a battle they couldn't win. This was because the enemy already knew their battle strategies due to the Count selling the military secrets to them. Moving away from the general area, the two turned down a quieter road and bumped into a girl selling jam. The girl asked them to buy some, so Tart took one of the jars and handed it to Lug, who tasted its contents. The next moment, he grabbed the basket from the girl and threw it to the ground, breaking all the jars in the process. Confused, the girl tried to salvage her goods just as 3 street thugs came and tried to intimidate Lug and Tart. As expected, the dynamic duo made quick work of the men, knocking them out instantly, after which, Tart asked if they were the ones in charge of distributing the drugs. Lug told her that the men were small fry and said that until they disrupted the chain of command and supply, they would always be around. He then approached the girl and asked if she was aware of what was in the jams she'd been selling. All she said was that her mother needed it and refused to speak further. Lug and Tart then accompanied her home and witnessed how her addict of a mother lost her cool when the girl told her that she didn't have the drugs. When it looked like she'd hurt the girl, Lug stepped in and overpowered the woman, restraining her to the floor. The girl tried to intervene, but Tart held her back and made her watch as Lug hit a particular pressure point on her back, knocking her out. Immediately, the girl rushed to her mother, and as she cradled her in her arms, Lug explained to Tart that he'd made it so the woman's body no longer needed the drugs. However, his skill couldn't do anything about the psychological dependence she already had on the drugs. After having seen enough, they returned to Tuatha Dé just as the batch of cosmetics from Orna was being offloaded. Inside the shipment, Maha had hidden a message, and after reading it, Lug confirmed that the Count was indeed running a drug trafficking ring. He resolved to end his life. A few days later, Lug and Maha traveled to the Count's home to visit his wife, using the newest product from Orna as their ticket into the house. After the woman tried the product, she asked the million-dollar question, Why had they chosen her? Lug explained that it was because they wanted to ride in her husband's popularity train. The unsuspecting woman agreed that her husband had been doing well as of late and that success had made him popular among his peers. Just then, the man of the hour walked in and, after speaking to his wife, he turned his attention to Lug and Maha. Lug introduced himself as Ilig Balor and successfully sucked up to the man, leaving him no room to suspect his presence in his home. Venkor thanked the pair for putting a smile on his wife's face, saying that the woman loved her cosmetics almost as much as she loved him. He then went to say goodbye to his wife, as he still had business to attend to, and all Lug did was quietly observe the two. Another day, Lug was invited to a party at the Venkor residence, and as usual, he was surrounded by his adoring fans. However, when the Count's wife came in with the new moisturizer, the women left him alone and flocked to the Count's wife instead. Venkor then approached Lug with a glass of wine and apologized for exploiting his popularity for the sake of his party. Lug assured him that he wasn't offended and tried to talk business with him. But Venkor told him that his business was small and not the kind that the Balor Trading Company would be interested in. Lug didn't respond to this statement, but he couldn't help but stare at the man after it. For the rest of the party, Lug mingled with the guests, toasted with Maha, and kept his eyes on the target at all times. Later that night, after the party was over, Lug and Tart returned to the Venkor region to carry out their assignment. Using the information the Count's wife had unintentionally given him about her husband's love for drinking on the terrace before bed, Lug knew where his target would be. Since they stayed at a far distance, Lug used his mystic eyes to zone in on Venkor, and as soon as the man was in range, he took the shot, bringing him down instantly. A few weeks later, Lug and Tart returned from a training trip on a deserted island and were welcomed by Maha. On the ride home, she told them that she had both good and bad news, and started with the good news. She informed Lug that she'd found the divine treasure he asked her to look into. Tart asked what a divine treasure was, so Lug explained that it was a tool possessing unbelievable abilities which surpassed anything a human could create. They had existed since ancient times and couldn't be destroyed no matter what. As he looked through the detailed report Maha handed him, she explained that the divine treasure she found was the magic spear G-Balg. It belonged to a man named Satanta Magnus, also known as Karn's Hound, and she was in talks with him to buy the weapon from him. Rumor had it that Satanta was the hero, but it was yet to be confirmed, and she didn't want to dwell on speculations. Maha assured Lug that she'd come to an agreement with Satanta and buy the spear from him. She then told him the bad news, which was that a civil war had broken out in Daya's kingdom, and her family had joined the war as part of the kingdom's army. Lug and Tart were shocked by this revelation, but that was only the tip of the iceberg because Maha hadn't finished breaking the bad news. She informed them that the rebel forces had a man on their side, who was giving the soldiers a hard time. And this man was none other than Satanta Magnus. The following day, Loverboy showed up at Daya's place unannounced, causing her to tease him about missing her. She then invited him inside, and as she poured some tea for them, she asked if he'd brought her some chocolates. Lug said that he hadn't, so she asked him to bring some the next time he came to visit, but he didn't respond. Her behavior confused him, so he asked about the war, and if it was true that things in the kingdom were heated. Daya laughed at this and said that despite what he'd heard, things around her region were relatively calm. Still not convinced, Lug asked if her family wasn't involved in the war, and she told him not to worry about them because they were a family of powerful sorcerers. Lug refused to let the issue die and told her that the news he'd received said that some nobles insulted the royal family and started a rebellion. Daya commended Lug for having so much information about a kingdom that he wasn't from and jokingly said if the Swoijel kingdom had their own aristocratic assassins, there wouldn't have been a war. Ignoring her jokes, Lug told Daya that he could arrange safe passage for her and her family out of the kingdom, using his position as Ilig Balor. This proposal annoyed Daya, and she told Lug that she didn't want his help because nothing on earth would make her abandon her people in times of need. The next moment, however, she switched up and said there was no need to worry over things she had no control over. Before Lug could comprehend what she'd just said, she told him that she wanted to go out and asked him to come with her. Lug tried to talk her out of going out, saying it wasn't the time for that sort of thing. But Daya ignored him and made him choose a dress for her. Before leaving the house, she changed her hair color so she wouldn't be recognized and happily walked around the town holding Lug's hand. They only stopped walking because Lug wanted to know what Daya would like for lunch. He just listed the best dishes in all the restaurants they could visit when his attention was drawn to a merchant walking by with his horse. Daya asked if there was a problem, and he said that the man was a veteran soldier, explaining that he had a sixth sense when it came to soldiers, In other words, he knew when soldiers were around or nearby, and he could tell right off the bat that the town was full of skilled warriors. Daya explained that the draft had brought a lot of people with military experience to the town so that they could help in case of an emergency. As they continued walking, Daya spotted a store which had a shooting game, so she begged Lug to go in with her. Inside the store, she asked him to win a teddy bear for her, but refused to let him use his magic because she considered it cheating. Realizing that even though he didn't use magic, it would still feel like he cheated, Lug decided to instruct Daya on what to do instead. The first shot she took didn't stick, so he asked her to relax and take another shot, which she did but failed. The third shot was the one that hit the bear, and Daya was beyond happy with herself because of it. After leaving the store, Daya told Lug she wanted to have some lasagna, so they went to a place that had it. While Daya and Lug were having lunch, Daya commented on how she preferred Lug's cooking over everything else. He then promised to cook for her the next time she came to Tuatha Day. And for some reason, her smile was replaced with a sad look. Lug noticed, so he asked what the problem was, and she assured him that there wasn't one before telling him that he had to keep his promise. On their way back, they encountered a little boy who seemed lost. So Lug got the boy to talk to them by using Daya's teddy bear as a puppet. The boy told them that he'd gotten separated from his mother earlier, so Daya used her magic to locate the woman through her voice. Once they located her, they took the child to her. And after the reunited family left, Daya took Lug to a hot spring. Lug was hesitant to get in the bath with Daya when he realized it was just the two of them there, but she refused to let him off the hook and pulled him in with her. They spent some time in the water, first playing, then floating as Daya talked about how much she loved her town. She said she was awaiting her father's return from the battlefield, and because of that, she couldn't go with him even though he was for her safety. Lug agreed to respect her wishes, but said he'd still make the preparations in case she decided to change her mind. At that moment, something shifted, and the two stopped trying to stay afloat, and sank into the water where they kissed and embraced each other. Later, Daya bid Lug farewell and told him that because of the situation, they couldn't see each other for a while. She promised to let him know when they could see each other again, and he told her he'd be waiting. Before leaving, he told her that he was looking forward to keeping his promise to cook a meal for her again, and Daya said she couldn't wait. As he walked away, she kept a smile on her face. But as soon as she knew he was gone, she dropped her mask and ordered her people to let their guard down. It turned out that the townspeople were actually soldiers pretending to be civilians, and since Lug was no longer around, they no longer had to pretend. Sometime later, Lug was lying in a field looking at the far necklace Daya had given him when Tart came running to him. She informed him that there was an issue and both of them rushed back to the Tuatha Day residence. Upon their arrival, they met his parents tending to an injured man, and Cyan told Lug that the man had given them a job. Cyan said he wanted Lug to carry out the job, and Lug accepted it. However, when he learned that his target was Daya, he was shocked. It turned out that after the kingdom lost the war against the rebels, Daya's father took full responsibility for it. He gave up most of his lands and wealth. However, those in power weren't satisfied and had now turned their attention to Daya. To avoid needless bloodshed and unnecessary fights, Daya's father agreed to let Daya have an arranged marriage with whomever they chose, and Daya was aware of it. When the time came for Daya to be handed over to them, her father's soldiers refused to let that happen. They attacked the envoy that came to pick up Daya and barricaded themselves and the Viacones inside the castle. It so happened that it wasn't only the soldiers who didn't want Daya to be handed away like a piece of meat, because the citizens also formed a volunteer army to help them fight. When the news reached the royal family, they declared the Count to be the instigator of another civil war, and ordered their troops to lay siege on the Viacones region, deducting that they wanted to end the war by ending Daya's life. Lug asked who the client was, and Cyan revealed that it was Daya's father, Count Vicone. He explained that the injured man lying on the floor was one of Vicone's soldiers, and he'd risked his life to come and deliver the message. However, Vicone's request wasn't truly an assassination request, because all he wanted was for them to fake Daya's death and take her far away from the Soijal kingdom. Vicone had realized that even if he won the battle, the kingdom would keep sending reinforcements until they fell. In other words, they wouldn't rest until then. Viacones were wiped off the face of the earth, and the Count wanted to ensure his daughter's safety at all costs. Lug asked Cyan why he accepted the job when their loyalty was to their kingdom, and Cyan answered that it was because he owed the Count a debt. He said if Lug refused to take the job, he would go himself. However, he couldn't guarantee that he'd get there in time. Lug thought long and hard about what he wanted to say. and after weighing the pros and cons, he decided to take on the job, even though it would mean putting his kingdom at risk. Cyan commended him for bending his principles to save the person he loved, and said he'd only ever bent his principles once in his life. Lug was surprised by his father's words because all his life he'd known Cyan to be a principled man. Cyan revealed that the only time he bent his principle was when he fought for his wife, who was part of the Vicone family. In other words, Lug was about to do the same thing his father did all those years ago. A little while later, Lug prepared to leave for the region of Vicone, but he intended to go alone because he didn't want Tart to exhaust her mana, trying to keep up with him. However, Tart refused to let him go alone and said she'd lend him her magic so that he could conserve his. Confused, he asked if she intended to carry him half the way. So she explained that she'd use her wind spell and pull him along with her. Lug understood what she meant, and after she created a barrier, they took off running. By using the barrier, Tart was blocking the air and reducing Lug's wind resistance, so that way, he didn't have to use too much of his energy. Not only that, but she was also pulling him along with negative pressure, which in a way was almost like she was carrying him. Lug appreciated this, but he still couldn't help but worry about Tart. As the maid was taking on a lot and overexerting herself for his sake, Tart didn't seem to mind that she was overexerting herself because all she wanted was to be useful to Lug. The thing is, she'd always known from the beginning that Lug had only taken her in because of her powers. Just like Maha, she was well aware that he manipulated her into staying with him. However, he was still the one who saved her life, and no matter what his intentions were, he gave her a second chance at life, which was why she never hesitated to do what he wanted or even do the things he didn't ask her to do. As they continued running, it started raining heavily, so Lug called out to Tart to stop and conserve her energy, but she refused and kept going. Tart didn't stop running for 1 second, and even when she was reaching her limit, she kept pushing until her body gave out and her barrier broke, pushing her back. Thankfully, Lug caught her before she could get seriously hurt and thanked her for bringing him that far. Tart asked him to promise that no matter what happened, he'd return home with Daya, and Lug assured her that he would. He then took off running towards the Vicone region, and as soon as he was out of sight, Tart broke into tears. This was because, despite everything, she was in love with him, and it hurt to see that he only had eyes for Daya. Hours later, Lug arrived at the Vicone region and took his time to observe the situation. He noticed that the kingdom's army had about 1,500 men on their side, while the Vicone army had only about 200. They also had more magic users on their side than the Vicone army, but for some reason, they hadn't tried to breach the town, deciding to level the playing field. Lug moved to another position and pulled out his rifle. He then began taking out the magic users one by one, causing the soldiers to go into a confused frenzy. It turned out that Daya had been attacking them from the castle using her gun, so having another gun user come at them from behind had them scrambling for answers. To destabilize them even more, Lug began shooting mana-filled far stones into their midst, which exploded as soon as they hit the target. Taking advantage of their enemies' disarray, the Vicone army charged at them, and an all-out battle began between them. While the fighting was going on, Lug attempted to sneak into the castle unnoticed when he spotted the body of a dead soldier and suddenly got an idea. Using his mystic eyes, he located the perfect path to take to the room where Daya was. Upon reaching there, he unlocked the door and Daya rushed into his arms when saw him. Seeing how close they were, the Count approached and said he was happy to see that his daughter would be in safe hands. The man then introduced himself to Lug and explained that their soldiers had locked them in that room because they realized he was on the verge of surrendering to their enemies. Lug asked what he intended to do now that he had arrived, and the man shared that he'd go into the battlefield and draw the enemy's attention to him since he was their target. Once he was sure his allies were far away, he would find a way to escape and lay low while planning a counterattack to return the kingdom to its rightful rulers. Agreeing with his plan, Lug said he'd set the room on fire and have everyone believe that Daya got fed up with the situation and took her life. He then brought in the body of the fallen soldier he wished to use as a decoy to prove that Daya was truly dead, prompting the Count to commend him for his quick thinking. Lug asked Daya to open the window overlooking the battlefield and shout at the top of her lungs that she wouldn't become anybody's possession, even though it hurt her to see people suffering because of her. Daya opened the window as instructed, but as she stood there, Lug suddenly felt a sense of danger and became worried. It was the same feeling he got when the organization double-crossed him in his previous life. So trusting his gut, he used his mystic eyes to search around the battlefield. Lo and behold, the reason for the danger he felt showed itself in the form of Satanta Magnus, the so-called hero, and he had the magic spear G-Ball. When Lug realized that he intended to use it, his blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels. Satanta released the weapon, and as it flew towards Daya, it took out everyone in its path. Thankfully, Lug threw something to slow it down and tackled Daya to the floor before the spear hit the room. Not surprisingly, despite the gravity of the blast, the spear remained intact, and it returned to Satanta like a boomerang. Using the mystic eyes, Lug saw that Satanta was overflowing with mana, and when he realized what that meant for them, he quickly summoned a cannon. As he fired the cannon at Satanta, the Count was left shocked after witnessing the power of the cannon, but what was more shocking was that Satanta was still alive and kicking. The only indication that he was hit was the blood running down his face. Other than that, he was fine, and he said it was the first time in a long time that he'd felt any kind of pain. Lug deduced that Satanta had an S-rank skill called Berserk, which is usually triggered by anger and increases the user's magical and physical abilities. Just then Satanta called out to Lug, giving him two options: watch him slaughter everyone around or duel against him like a knight. He promised that if Lug won, he would withdraw his forces and instruct them never to attack the Vicones again. Daya tried to make Lug reject Satanta's offer, but Lug said nothing, as he was lost in thought weighing his options. He knew that Satanta's Berserk skill made him a tough opponent, and together with his spear, he could get rid of Lug in the blink of an eye. Knowing his chances were slim to none, Lug tried to think of a way he and everyone else wouldn't end up dead. Eventually, Lug agreed to duel against Satanta, much to Daya's horror, and he admitted that he'd lose the duel against the Berserk Hulk. Daya couldn't understand how he could remain calm when he was just about to walk to his funeral, but Lug assured her that he'd be fine. He summoned what looked like a bomb and told Daya that he was an assassin, not a knight or a hero, so he would use an assassin's method to handle the problem that was Satanta. He then said an incantation to send the bomb somewhere before asking the Count to go down to the battlefield with him to meet Satanta. When Lug came face to face with Satanta, the man cheered happily because he felt he'd finally met a worthy opponent. He asked Lug for his name, and Lug told him he was Ferry Marconi to keep his real identity a secret. Taking another look at the man before him, Lug realized that his injuries were completely healed, but that didn't discourage him one bit. He asked Satanta if he'd keep his promise and leave if he lost, and Satanta replied that he would. Hearing this, Lug assured him that he wouldn't leave the battlefield alive, making Satanta laugh and call him Balsi. However, he called one of his soldiers and told him that if he were to die, they were to honor his promise and retreat. He then turned to Lug and requested that they begin their duel, but Lug was trying to stall for time, so he asked Satanta to order his men to move away. He said there was no reason for the men to get caught up in their duel, so Satanta agreed and ordered them away. The Count also left, but before he did, he wished Lug good luck and prayed that he would survive. Now alone with Satanta, Lug pulled out a coin and told Satanta that they would begin fighting as soon as the coin hit the ground. Satanta agreed, so Lug tossed the coin in the air and both of them prepared to attack. However, Satanta never got the chance because the moment the coin hit the ground, the bomb Lug had prepared earlier hit him like a freight train. Lug had gotten the idea from a war weapon back in his former world, and after creating and tweaking it with magic, he set it off and had been waiting for it to re-enter the planet the entire time he was stalling. The force of the explosion sent Lug flying, but he used his magic to reduce its impact, so when he hit a broken wall, he didn't get seriously injured. He felt proud that he'd gotten rid of Satanta and embraced the darkness when it came. He later woke up to Daya calling out to him, and when she saw that he was still alive, she hugged him. She thanked him for saving everyone but questioned why he'd risked his life for them when the issue didn't involve his family or kingdom. Lug explained that he'd done it to keep the promise he made to come to her when she needed him the most, and that made her happy. Looking around, Lug didn't see anyone from the enemy's side, so he pointed out that if there were no witnesses they couldn't fake her death. Daya agreed with him, but for some reason, she didn't seem to care, and neither did Lug, because he suddenly kissed her without warning. Days later, Lug returned home with Daya while her father and his people left the Vicone region for their safety. In the days which followed, things returned to normal, so Cyan called Lug into his to speak with him, Esri and Tart. It was agreed that they would let people believe Daya was their daughter since she looked very much like Esri. With the issue of Daya's identity out of the way, Cyan informed Lug that the hero had appeared in their kingdom. Lug was shocked by this because it meant that he'd wasted his spell on someone who wasn't the hero. Unaware of the thoughts in his son's head, Cyan instructed Lug to keep an eye on the situation because the hero's appearance meant the Demon Lord would soon appear too. Do you think Lug would stand a chance against the real hero, or would he get Ice Skate again? That's all for today's video. If you made it this far and enjoyed it, comment, plot. See you in the next video.